y'all, it's Mary Hyatt, and I'm so excited you're here for this month's topic, which is all about pleasure. But before we hop into today's episode, I thought I would ask, are you scared to feel it? Does it trigger you? Does it make your body tighten? Well, if you answered yes to any of those questions, you are not alone. But if you hang with me, I think I might be able to change your mind. This month, we'll explore what pleasure is, what happens when it gets repressed and turned sideways, and help you find healthy ways to embrace it in your everyday life. All right, guys, I'll see you inside this week's episode.
Welcome to the Living Fully Alive podcast with Mary Hyatt, here to help you find your authentic voice, learn how to love yourself, and embrace your life. And now, your host, life and mindset coach, body love advocate, and doTERRA presidential diamond, Mary Hyatt.
Hey, everybody. It is Mary and Lindsley. We are hanging out here once again, always at the dining room table. Our little office.
Yes.
And I'm excited to dive deeper into the third episode of this topic for the month of pleasure. And this is going to be sort of the next level down, a deeper dive even from last week. Last week, we really got into talking about what happens when pleasure goes sideways, when you've experienced such a deficit that you start needing more and more, and it becomes obsessive, oftentimes kind of towards that addictive realm, the sort of the shadow side of pleasure. And we talked about, where does this fear around pleasure come from? And if you have not listened to last week's episode, I really encourage you to go back and listen to it. It's really, I think, a profound conversation that a lot of people aren't having. And I think as women, it's important to be having these kinds of conversations where these topics are a little taboo and make us maybe a little bit uncomfortable. But I think that you'll find that Lindsley and I do a pretty good job at, getting back to feeling safe and, in a healthy way, opening up to a pleasure that feels safe for you. And we're going to get into a little bit more of what happens when you feel like pleasure is, kind of a luxury.
Mm-hmm.
Like when it starts from a place of, I don't deserve this. And it moves into, all of a sudden, you're overgiving, and you're overgiving. And then it turns into anger, and then it turns into resentment. And then all of a sudden you go, no, F this.
I need pleasure now.
I need pleasure now. And gosh, that just happened to me the other day.
I was going to say, tell everybody this story about what happened for you.
So the other day, I sent Lindsley a text, and I said, I just put 3 white flag emojis in the text, which she knew exactly what that meant, because that's our little way to say, hey, like
reaching out for help.
What do you call that? Yeah, just like raising the white flag.
Yeah,
like, I'm
totally
done and I need help, and I don't really have the words to say anything. And the great thing about Lindsley is that she just, called me right away, and we had a great conversation. And what had happened is that I had been in a season of overgiving and not listening to myself, having a lot of old fears that were coming up and motivating this need to overgive in order to earn love. That's kind of my go-to as an Enneagram 2 as the helper, helping people, giving to people gives me love. That's the equation in my brain. And so I had not been in a healthy place with that and was just overgiving. And I hit this threshold where all of a sudden I found myself on empty. It'd be really like not even empty, like fumes.
Yeah.
And I called Lindsley and I was like, I'm done. I am done. I have literally nothing else to give. I'm so exhausted, but I was so angry. I was so angry. And anger is not an emotion that I feel a lot of. Like I'm not afraid of anger. I think it's really powerful to move that through your body and really value anger, but I don't know. I'm just not a super angry person. And so it's not as comfortable with me as far as something I'm used to. But man, when I called you, it was in my veins, flooding my body in a way that made me physiologically, somatically shake. And I was like, I am about to go blow some shit up.
And what did I say? I was like, thank God it's about time you got angry.
Yeah.
Because that is the indicator that there's been some sort of boundary that's been crossed. And it's a boundary with yourself, right? It's like you had crossed a threshold and you were pissed off at life, but you were also even angry at yourself that you've been overgiving so much. So it was like, yay.
Well, it's like that's the breakthrough. That's that moment from moving from denial to awareness and acknowledgement and saying, okay, yep, I've been doing this. Here I am. This is clearly not working for me. But it was interesting because my first instinct was to go get something that was going to like overindulge, like in an unhealthy way, again, because it's from that place of deficit that I was so resentful that I was like, in the conversation in my head beforehand, I think this is so common for women, is we say, well, I don't deserve this. Like when we talk about self-care, when we talk about pleasure, when we talk about giving back to ourselves, it's like, I don't need that.
Yeah.
I don't need that, or I don't deserve that. It's probably the deeper layer.
Until then, all of a sudden, where you got so angry that it becomes from this place of pleasure is a wanting, right, in a good way, to the other extreme when there's been such a depletion that you're like, I deserve better. I deserve my time now. It's about me. It's like we swing from one pendulum to the next where we're overgiving, and then it's all about what we get in return. So that kind of righteous anger kicks in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what it sounds like you went into, is like, now it's my turn.
Yeah, exactly.
And think about how many women, especially mothers,
I was going to say it's mama's turn.
Yeah.
Well, and that was something. I was at the beach this weekend with a group of girls, and there's a bunch of moms, and obviously you and I can't truly speak to this in a way that's firsthand because we don't have children. But I see this happening a lot for mothers, that they start giving to everyone else and making sure that everybody else's needs are met, and their own longing, their own wanting becomes second to the longing and wanting of everybody else involved, whether it's their people at work, whether it's their children, their husband, whomever. And there usually is this tipping point that I see that happens where they get fed up by their own doing, right? But again, it's because we believe we don't deserve this.
That they're not allowed to want.
They're not. Yeah, we've been taught this.
Yeah,
we talked about that last week, and so then there's a tipping point where they get so fed up and they say, kind of like throw the dishes.
Yes,
throw the glass across the kitchen.
Yeah,
and break it.
Aggression.
Just like, I deserve something.
Now my turn.
And it's like, that's a clear indicator to me. It's like, and how I felt, what I've been doing is not working, because there is a way to experience pleasure and not get to that place of complete depletion, anger, and resentment. But I think it needs to start with, and maybe not even start with, but recognizing that pleasure isn't something to go and get.
Yeah, pleasure is not a reward. It's like if after you've gotten everything done, or after everybody else has got their needs met, then I deserve it, and it's a reward. There's like a transactionalness to it.
And it's like we think pleasure is one more thing to do. So it's like adding it to the list, like, we can also feel some guilt around that when we haven't been doing this, or haven't been experiencing pleasure. But it's like, it's not just like to go get a pedicure, or to go get yourself flowers, or whatever it is. I mean, yes, those things are pleasurable, but it's like recognizing that pleasure is available to us at all times, because it's something that is sensual in the sense that we experience it through the senses. And because we're human beings, we have access to our senses all day, every day. And so we can experience pleasure instead of waiting until it has to become a reward and meeting everybody else's needs first, or checking off enough things on the to-do list. And then we go get pleasure. But it's like, how can I find the everyday little pleasures in the here and the now? Well,
yeah, because it's like, to go back to, it's not a reward. It's not something you get after all the work is done. It's a human right. And then if you think about this too, it's like how we do this. I've heard myself do this. It's like, let me take like 4 days off and have a girls' trip so that I can escape my life.
There's a quote, I'm trying to remember who says this. It's like, to strive to live for a life that we don't need therapy to recover from.
Yeah.
You know, where it's like we go on damage control.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, or just like 2 weeks of vacation a year, and we think that that's going to satisfy.
Yeah.
This part of us that is the wanting, is the part of us that has desires, that can be passionate, that can be awakened. And yet so often we feel like to get those to-do lists, to clean the house, to make sure the bills are paid, to make sure the kids are eating and all the things, that pleasure isn't even on that to-do list, on that checklist. And so, man, it's like we have to almost carve out this time for it. In our minds, we think we got to carve out this special time for it, when in reality, it really is available all the time.
Well, and I just even think about little things like what we would consider to be pleasure is like, oh, that decadent piece of chocolate cake. I deserve this because I've just had such a shitty day. And, or, you know, even I'm a good working mom and I've worked all the time. I deserve a girls trip away. It's like, and all those things are great, but how do you actually like get all this to come home with you after the girls trip?
Well, like, how do you live a life of pleasure versus just having pleasurable moments?
Yeah.
And to live a life of pleasure means to me that you sort of have to be awake and present in the present moment, because pleasure is in the present moment. It is really about experiencing the sensations, what you see, what you hear, what you taste, what you feel, what you touch. I feel like I'm missing a sense. What you see, and all of that in this moment. Like we oftentimes will say, okay, well, pleasure is in the future. I'm going to, it's like the vacation in the distant future. It's the experience later, where pleasure is in the present moment. And so to me, it is a mindfulness of slowing down and connecting with the here and the now. And I mean, we could do that right now. We could experience that moment of pleasure, even though, none of us, you and I, we're not eating cake. We're not drinking wine. We're not in a flower shop. And we're just like, got a mic in our face and doing our work. This is our work today. And yet there's pleasure here today.
Yeah. Well, so, I mean, I'm just thinking about like a practice that I've heard, done before. It's like a meditative practice where or teach people how to connect to their bodies, even asking themselves like this kind of contemplative questioning of going, I feel pleasure when ... I unleash my pleasure when I awaken myself how. And, it's like just, for example, I awaken my passion when I think of myself, when I take care of myself, when I pamper myself, when I give myself time to go and do the things I enjoy. That makes me feel alive, makes me feel worthy. Things like listening to good music, asking yourself these contemplative questions so that when you are turned on to life.
Yeah.
And then when do you get turned off?
I was just going to say, because like the second layer of this is, I think it's one thing to know, okay, what brings us pleasure? Okay, it's almost like I do this with the body image work that I do. I feel confident, most confident when. And so you start going, oh, I feel most confident when I'm in this state, or I do this. And you're sort of like creating almost your own little recipe for knowing how to get to the state of confidence, or the state of pleasure, or the state of joy, whatever it is that you want to feel the most at, the feeling of pleasure. So it's like, what's the recipe for feeling that pleasure? A plus B equals C for you. When I do this, when I do this, when I do this. But I think what you're getting at too is it's like rewinding for a second, because that's one side of the coin. But the first side is really, when did this stop?
Yeah. When did I shut down?
Where did
how I shut down when?
I shut down when. And then this is how I shut down. It's almost like we have these survival little things that we do that shut us down, that keep us safe. Yeah. I was actually doing this exercise today on the plane on the way home from this trip today. And I was doing this around money. And I had to identify all of the past beliefs that I've had surrounding money that were negative, like money equals stress. There's never enough money, all these different money beliefs. In the same with pleasure, it's like what are these beliefs around being turned off by life? It's not safe to feel pleasure. Pleasure means that I am selfish. I get punished when that's a big thing. I remember this is like sexual pleasure, but I remember as a little girl, like masturbating as a little girl, which all kids do, right?
Right.
let's take the taboo away from this. It's like we're learning our bodies, but the shame around that. And so it's like there's shame around pleasure.
Yeah.
And we're not even going to get into the sexual side of things, but I'm just thinking like the messaging that we receive about pleasure in general, it's not okay as a woman. It's not okay to feel pleasure, or I have to hide that part of myself or do that in private. You know, pleasure is private, which again cultivates that shame. But like, where are all these sort of belief systems around our inability to experience pleasure?
So, and you know, I just thought about this too. It's like we started this conversation talking about how you sent me the white flags that you're going into the red zone, so to speak.
Yeah.
And it really is a question that they ask a lot of people in recovery is, how do you know when your life is becoming unmanageable?
Yeah.
And so like the question we're asking everyone listening is, how do you know when you are shutting down? And it's like when you really start saying, I've turned myself off by, or I shut down when. And for example, it could be like when I don't go into nature, when I don't listen to music that lights me up, when I am disconnected from my body, when I'm disconnected from my partner, like when
I'm watching 6 hours of Netflix over the weekend, when I stop going out with friends.
Yep.
It's like, these are all the ways that when we kind of start to isolate and we stop doing the things that keep us turned on for life or give us pleasure. That's like noticing our patterns. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Noticing your patterns and behaviors and your habits that shut you down.
Yeah. Because fundamentally, all of this is about self-worth. Like literally, it's like, it's really about a woman's relationship with herself and literally getting to know what that is for her. Because, you know, we've been talking about pleasure this whole month, but really pleasure for you is different than it is for me as it is for anybody else. So it's literally, you've got to get to know yourself enough that you're able to, and you have to have enough self-worth to even say, I'm giving myself permission to like notice what brings me pleasure.
It's deservability.
Yeah.
It's deservability. And going back to what you said earlier, believing a fundamental belief, shifting where we were to where we are now, where pleasure is a luxury or pleasure is selfish, going to what you were saying, pleasure is a human right.
Yeah.
That everyone deserves to feel pleasure and giving ourselves that permission. And so when we go into the self-worth piece, what we're saying is, I don't deserve pleasure, that I'm not worthy to experience pleasure, that everybody else could have it, but not me.
And if you think about it too, we're almost at this like epidemic point really in society. I mean, we have like the most confident and successful and most powerful group of women in history, literally walking around all the time, over giving, overdoing, overworking, juggling everything. And then thinking that until it all gets done, until it's perfect, then they can experience or make time for themselves. Like, this is a paradigm shift.
I was going to say, it's a paradigm shift in like asking the questions, who would I be if I allowed myself to experience pleasure every day? How would my life shift if I began to open up to pleasure? What would happen if I gave myself permission to experience pleasure? And I think these little bit kind of open-ended questions are really helpful when you're in this process of shifting a paradigm, moving from a place of being shut down and closed off to open and receptive. We're asking, who might I be if this shifts? And it's what we're asking is not necessarily to shift right now, right here. It's beginning to get curious about what my life might look like if I started to open up to pleasure a little bit more. And I remember thinking this when I started this whole journey. And I started to think about, what would it kind of look like if I actually enjoyed my life? Because I hated my life so much that felt like such a foreign concept. Hey y'all, I just wanted to interrupt this episode real quick to remind you to subscribe to this podcast. I know that emails get lost in your spam folder, so subscribing means my episodes come right to your phone. So go ahead, hit that quick little subscribe button so that you don't miss out on any of the Living Fully Alive episodes. Plus, in addition to subscribing to the podcast, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel as well. I don't know if you know this, but I have been releasing guided meditations every Monday over on YouTube, and you're not going to hear them here. So if you've been wanting to start an easy meditation practice, subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you don't miss out on my short 15-minute guided meditations. All right, now back to this week's episode. And so what we're asking here for those of you listening is to just crack open that door just a little bit. You don't have to swing it wide open all of a sudden. It's like, I'm just experiencing all this pleasure. It's amazing. And I'm fully alive. And it's like, no, it's like with anything, this is a really like slow, gentle process of starting to get curious, like, there might be a different way of experiencing life than I've been experiencing it so far.
Yeah.
A way that is more free, a way that feels more peaceful, a way that feels more joy-centered and more alive. And one of the things that I like to do in this kind of experience of getting curious is looking for references of people who are living the kind of life that I might want to live, or at least have an element that I'm discovering. And there is this movie called Under the Tuscan Sun.
I love that movie. Yes.
I have watched that so many times, and it's such a powerful movie.
Yeah.
But it's about this woman. She gets divorced. She goes on a trip to Italy, solo trip to Italy, and ends up buying a villa. And it's basically a whole journey of her becoming alive. But there's a character in that I think it's a book too, but the movie, there's a character in there who's like, I don't know, she's probably in her 50s, and she is an American, but she wears the most beautiful dresses, wear these ridiculous huge hats, bright red lipstick. And there's a scene where she goes and gets an ice cream cone. And they're just walking around in Italy, and this woman is just like sensually enjoying this ice cream cone and getting so much pleasure. And which is just like such a foreign concept to Americans to like actually enjoy a dessert. But it's just such a picture of the bigger story here. And the whole thing is this person kind of became an archetype for this woman going through this transformation. She all of a sudden was able to see, not that she was going to become identical to this woman or that it would even look the same as she began to express her own pleasure in her own life, but that she saw somebody doing this thing. And so what I would say is part of this journey, which is helpful, is when we begin to crack that door open just a little bit. What would my life be like if I could open up to a little bit more pleasure, if I gave myself permission, if I allowed it to see people in your life? Who do you know? It doesn't have to be personally. It can be an author, a movie character, somebody that you're not connected to personally, who is a demonstration, an archetype, a representation of that kind of person embodying and embracing pleasure.
Yeah.
So that you can begin to see a picture, because you can't reference your own life for this.
It's true. Yeah.
Like if you are shut down, you can't say, oh, well, I've done that before, or I know what that feels like. You don't.
And it's a practice.
It's a practice.
I mean, that's why I always say you just giving yourself permission and just being willing to even give yourself permission. Yeah. And, I don't know too, it's kind of ironic if you think about what we're saying is a very feminine approach to life, right? It's like the masculine, and I don't mean this in gender, because men, gosh, we haven't even talked about how they need to embody more of these kind of things too. But there's an element of like all this achieving and all this kind of, the reason why we got into doing the overdrive and the overwork was because we think that it's going to help us get the life we want. And how ironic that always just ends up being burnout, and that the irony of the whole thing is you probably end up being a whole lot more productive in your life if you actually allow more of this soft power. There's a lot of people are using in the corporate world emotional intelligence, or, the soft power versus the hard power. And it's like once you start in bringing in these elements of sensory and pleasure, you probably end up getting a whole lot more done on a big,
sure.
I mean, the productivity factor of this, but it's the difference between a state of being versus that state of doing.
Well, and we were talking about this beforehand, but that pleasure doesn't accomplish anything. You can't, and we're kind of saying like, check it off as far as like making it a priority, but it actually doesn't achieve anything.
Right.
Like it's not something that's, you're saying, hey, I'm going to make sure that I do this. It's just something that feels good. It feels nice. It makes you feel alive. It's fun.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to really even be good for anything necessarily. Like you're experiencing pleasure for the sake of feeling pleasure. Like I think about flowers, for example. I love having fresh flowers in my house. And that's something that I often have. It's like my love language is flowers. So if you want to love me, send me some fresh flowers. But seriously, there's nothing more than I love. And you'll see them on my Instagram. I take pictures of my flower arrangements. And what I love about it is it's like symbolic to what we're talking about, which is it is beauty for the sake of beauty.
Yeah.
Like they die in 3 days. It's almost like seems like ridiculous and indulgent, like it's a waste of money. But it's just there for the sake of pleasure, for the sake of beauty. And it helps me, it helps remind me that I can enjoy life right here, right now, and open up to beauty where it's not something on my to-do list. Mm-hmm. It's not something that I can achieve. It's like, we're just here in this beauty, in this moment, and to just like savor the moment, to take it in. And that's what I love about beauty so much, things that are beautiful. It's like, we're just able to just take it in, and it has nothing to do with achievement.
Well, you know what I think we're saying is like, pleasure is actually just a state of mind. It's a state of aliveness, of vitality, of sensuality. It accomplishes nothing. It is totally unproductive. It's actually more of a mental state.
It totally is. Well, and if you think about it, all of us can get into that state.
Yeah.
Like a pleasurable state, a joyful state, a fulfilled state, a grateful state. You know, these are all things. And it's about coming back into that present moment and starting to see with new eyes what has been available and around us this whole time. It's like literally, it's like we could sit in this room and be frantic and stressed and just going, oh my God, we got to get this podcast done. And, you know, you've got somewhere to be after this, and we got to make this happen. Versus the same moment that's available to us right here, right now. If we just look at it with new eyes, we go, oh my God, the color of this wall, the trees outside, the smell in this room, the live plants that are here in the office. Like, we could begin to feel our bodies, to feel our breath, to notice the beauty around us. And so that's what's so powerful, is that it doesn't require that we have to do anything other than just to receive what's already here.
And just to feel good. Like, pleasure is literally just supposed to be fun, and it's just nice, and it just feels good.
Well, and I think that when you get to that place where pleasure is not just an escape of life, but it is life. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about, the state. Like, it is life. It becomes you. This begins to ripple out in every area of your life. Like, it's like seeing a child. Like, today we went and got coffee before we did this, and there was this little girl, and I think she thought I was her mom. I think she couldn't see me because of the light, but I was walking into the coffee shop, and she was being held by her dad, and she just reached out her arms and was so excited that I was walking up. And if I had been on my phone, or if I would have missed that moment. I did not know this little girl from anybody, but that was the most precious little moment. And I was like, oh my God.
And it brought pleasure.
It brought pleasure, but I had to be present to see it and not walk straight by it, but to be there and to be in that state of going, it's like, I can experience pleasure all the time.
Yeah. And you can't do that in a state of stress or anxiety or anything else. You have to be open to curiosity, to your awareness. And like we said, it is a human right. It has nothing to do with some achievement that you finally get to have your reward. It just is. And you're missing the beauty of life if you don't give yourself that permission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one other element that I want to talk about is this idea that there is some kind of a motivation, typically, when we think about, like we talked about last week, sort of the overindulgence, obsessive, quick fix, dopamine hit kind of pleasure that we think is going to give us what we actually want, to where there is something that happens before we get to pleasure. So pleasure to me is the behavior, is the action. It is experiencing the senses. Like, it's like we are... It's a verb, really, to me. It's like a pleasurable state. You know, we're experiencing all this. But before that has to be this feeling of desire that brings us to the place of wanting to fulfill the desire in the form of experiencing pleasure. And I love talking about desire. And this is a conversation we won't get too deep into this because my guess is that we'll probably do in the future a whole series on desire. But there is something about desire that comes before seeking out pleasure. And starting to ask ourselves, what is that need of the desire, the thought of the desire, the belief that is bringing us to have this feeling of desire? And it's that craving. It's that wanting. What are we really after when we go seek out pleasure? It's kind of another element of self-reflection. So we've been geeking out about this guy, Kyle Cease, and he is writing a lot about money, and he was just recently interviewed by Lewis Howes. And so Lindsley and I were talking about this episode, and they were talking about how they were eating. This guy was saying, I just love pizza. You know, I love pizza. I love ice cream. And I just love the pleasure that I get from that. And Kyle said, I wonder if what you think is pleasurable, like you think the food is giving you the pleasure. You think the piece of pizza is giving you the pleasure. But what actually is giving you the pleasure is the fact that slice of pizza reminds you of a moment that you had with your mom. And so when you eat that pizza, you're connected to the love of your mother. And so every time you want to eat pizza, you're actually not after the pizza slice, like the actual, pepperoni and dough. You're actually after the love of your mother. And it's like, I think about that in such a powerful way that what we're really after when we're looking at desires, that wanting, that craving, what are you really hungry for? That brings us to those moments of accessing pleasure, to get pleasure. It's understanding like, what need am I trying to meet by this kind of pleasure, this quick dopamine hit? And that's the difference between being in a pleasurable state and that being a state and being alive for life versus trying to meet an unmet need.
Oh, so powerful. Yeah. Esther Perel, she talks a lot. She does a lot of couples counseling, and she talks about sex therapy, and people come to her because there's like stuff going on within their relationship. And she says, it really wouldn't help to actually talk about your sex life. Like, it's interesting and like we need to know, but actually if you're not cultivating the eroticism of your life outside of here, then you're not going to actually ever address the core issue of what's like, it's just your sex life is just a manifestation of things that are going on. So it's like what you're saying about the pizza. It's like you're going to end up having physical things in your life that you think are the issues.
Right.
But if you're never really dealing with what's the drive and the core that always originates back from childhood things, then you're actually going to never be able to tap into that real sense of longevity, sustainable, pleasurable life.
Well, yeah, because it's basically like all the external things that we see that we think matter, that we think would give us pleasure. Money will give me pleasure. Owning more things will give me pleasure. The vacation's going to give me pleasure. Spending time with my girlfriends is going to give me pleasure. Eating this thing is going to give me pleasure. Having sex is going to give me pleasure. Whatever it is, all those external things are actually just the physical manifestation of what it is that we're feeling inside. And the real work is getting back to that state, getting back to going to an internal place and saying, this is in me already. Everything that I'm seeking and trying to find externally really can be found internally in myself. So again, what does it look like to move from the space of pleasure, of joy, of desire, of passion, of living life 3D, full color, being alive, turned on, tapped in for life? What does it look like to come from that place versus it's just trying to fill a void by all these external things that are little Band-Aids that we hope will bandage up this deeper longing, deeper craving? It's like all these cravings that we have are really asking for our attention.
Yes.
There's like paying attention. Like, hey, like there's a deficit here. You've been giving too much. Slow down. We need something. Having needs, all of those things. It's like finding those pleasurable moments in the here and now so that you don't get into that place of Band-Aiding your life, of getting to the place where you're in red zone, where you get to that anger, where you get to that resentment, but where it's like you're cultivating this pleasurable relationship with life.
Yeah.
Day in and day out. And not as a to-do, but as an experience.
And you deserve that.
And you deserve it. I mean, we can just stop there.
There it is.
Done and done. Well, guys, thank you so much for being a part of this conversation and being ears to just hearing a paradigm shift. And again, this work is not something that happens overnight, and this may be a brand new concept for you. And so I would encourage everybody to not add guilt and shame that you've been doing it wrong or you need to fix something, that this is just opening up that little door, cracking it open to exploring what could life be like if it were more pleasurable, if you could give yourself permission to allow it to be more pleasurable. And next month, we are going to be talking about body connection.
Hey,
which is going to be a fantastic month. We've got an incredible special guest next month. Lindsley and I are really going to get in some cool topics as it relates to our body and our body-mind connection. So make sure you tune in next week with us. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. And you know what? I'm just going to do a big ask, which is to share our podcast with a girlfriend.
Please. Yes.
Start the conversation with your community. That would just be so cool. So y'all, thank you so much for being with us. And just remember that the purpose of life is to be great and to be full, to be grateful. So y'all, we will see you next week. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Talk to you soon. Bye. If you love today's episode, make sure to share it with your girlfriends and invite them into this month's topic of pleasure. And if you want to keep the discovery journey going of living more fully alive, check out all my past episodes from the podcast over at maryhyatt.com/show. Plus, you'll be able to grab the show notes for this episode, along with the essential oil recipe of the month that will help you open up to the gift of experiencing pleasure so that you can truly embrace this present moment and be fully alive. Again, that's maryhyatt.com/show. See y'all next week.